Hello, everybody, and welcome back to the second shelf. It's the 1st of July, and that can only mean one thing: new month, new books. The TBR for July, and for the purpose of this video, as most of you will know, TBR means to be released. So I look at the books to be published in July, and then I pick a couple that I find interesting. But before I go into the new releases, a public service announcement. I know I'm behind on answering my comments. 2 or 3 weeks behind. Sorry about that. I had a really busy the second half of June was really busy. I will answer the comments as usual, but it just takes a little more time than usual. Sorry about that. Anyway, so let's get into the books. And as always, we start with general fiction, and I have 2 books in that category. And the first one is the new novel by Yi-Yun Lee, Must I Go, which will be published end of the month, 28th of July. Yi-Yun Lee was born in China, but she immigrated to the US, and she writes in English, so this is not translated fiction. I read a couple of previous works by Yi-Yun Lee, her first novel, The Vagrants, which I quite liked, and I really loved her memoir, Dear Friend from My Life, I Write to You in Your Life, about her struggle with mental illness. She's one of those authors that so far the novels, they didn't completely wow me, but somehow I think she will at some point, and that's why I chose to include Must I Go into the July TBR. The novel is about an 81-year-old woman, Lillian, and she has survived multiple husbands, and she has children and grandchildren, and now at 81, she reads and comments on a diary of one of her former lovers, Roland, which has been published, but he's long gone. So it's an epistolary book, which I always like. If it's well done, I like that. But the idea, of an older woman looking back at her life, commenting in a, as I understood, sometimes quite sarcastic way on this self-grandizing diary of a former lover. That sounded interesting, but as I said in the beginning, my main reason for including this book in the TBR is that I really think at some point Yi-Yun Lee will write something that will completely wow me. So, Must I Go? I will give it a try, and hopefully it is this one book that will wow me. The second book in the category general fiction is Transcendent Kingdom by Ya Gyasi. It will be published. It's one of those books where the publication date has been pushed back to September, but the Kindle edition will be published in July on the 14th. Ya Gyasi is an author I'm sure most of you will be familiar with. She was born in Ghana, but she grew up in Alabama, and her debut novel, Homegoing, was a BookTube darling. It was a best-selling book, and I really liked it. It was historical fiction about 2 sisters from the slavery time until modern days. Not the sisters didn't live that long, but the families. Anyway, Transcendent Kingdom is also about a family from Ghana living in the US, and we have Gifty, the daughter, who is a researcher, neuroscience researcher at Stanford. She had a brother, Nana, but he died of an overdose. He was an athlete, and then he had an injury and got hooked on pain medication. And there is the mother who, after the son's death, now lives in her bed. The idea, first of all, of neuroscience, you know me. I love that subject. So that included in a novel about the workings of the brain, and how you could maybe with science help explain grief and loss. Sign me up right away. And I loved her first book, so I'm really curious how this writer will develop. And Transcendent Kingdom, coming out only on Kindle in July, and if you're not into ebooks, you will have to wait until September. Next up is crime fiction. And for the July TBR, I picked a book that will be released today on the 1st of July, Christina Schwartz, Bonnie. Christina Schwartz is an American writer, and I read a previous book by hers, Drowning Ruth, about the drowning of a mother, and then plot ensues from there. I think it was published 10 years ago or something, or maybe even longer, but I quite liked it. I liked the writing style, I liked the story, so when I saw that Christina Schwartz had a new book coming out, I checked it out, and the story of this one really intrigues me because Bonnie is about Bonnie Parker from Bonnie and Clyde. You all know Bonnie and Clyde, of course. We know about the bank robberies during the Great Depression in the US in the 1930s, and the shootout that killed them both in 1934. But there's more to Bonnie Parker's life than just this well-known crime spree that we all know about. Bonnie Parker was an excellent student. She was a star student, even from a good family. And I think Bonnie Parker is a really fascinating character. And the idea of a fictionalized sort of true crime novel about the life of this woman who ended up in crime and got shot is fascinating to me. And because I liked the previous book by this author, Bonnie made it onto the TBR, the July TBR, in the category crime fiction. Next up is crime fiction. We did that already. Next up is nonfiction, of course. And for this month, for July, I picked Annalee Newitz's book, 4 Lost Cities, which will be published next week on the 7th of July. Annalee Newitz was born in California in 1969. She is a science writer, and she also writes sci-fi books. I read a couple of those, and I liked them, but this is obviously nonfiction. And like the title says, it's about 4 lost cities. One in Turkey. I'm not going to try to pronounce the name of that city. Pompeii in Italy, Angkor in Cambodia, and an indigenous city on the Mississippi River where now East St. Louis is situated. And she explores, like the subtitle said, the forgotten history of urban life all the way back in the past. I think that subject is absolutely fascinating. I have never read nonfiction by this author, but her sci-fi writing style I liked, and the subject matter of 4 cities. I mean, we all have heard of Pompeii and Angkor, but the Turkish city she explores, the name of which I am not going to try to pronounce, I have never heard, and I have never heard of this indigenous metropolis on the Mississippi River, where St. Louis is now situated. So I think that's fascinating. So 4 Lost Cities is a nonfiction looking forward pick for the July TBR. And as always, we end the TBR with science fiction, sci-fi. And for the month of July, I picked Afterland by Lauren Bucus. Lauren Bucus is a South African author, and when I saw the blurb for this book, I wouldn't have picked it if it weren't for the author, because the blurb says Children of Men meets Handmaid's Tale. That puts me off right there. But I know this author, and she writes weird stuff. It's a mixture of sci-fi, but also like sci-fi noir, if you want to call it, and it's weird. If you have read books by her, you know what I mean. So I thought if this author tackles the theme, I should just disregard the blurb. But anyway, the book is set in a dystopian future where after an epidemic, most of the men have died. And the men left are used as reproductive tools or sex objects, But this feminist dystopian society it's not a utopia. So we have the main character Miles, one of the few boys left alive. He's 12 years old and he's on the run together with his mother Cole, because his sister Billy and her crew, they want to capture him and use him as a sex object or reproductive tool or whatever. So it's a road trip through this dystopian US, and the idea of a road trip thriller set in a dystopian sci-fi society where men are hunted because there are so few of them left and they are used for certain purposes, I thought was a good premise, an interesting premise. Don't interpret anything into that. I don't want all men to die, but I thought the premise was interesting. And so despite of this horrible blurb, Children of Men meets Handmaid's Tale, Handmaid's Tale, anyway. But the author is a good author and she writes weird things, like I said. So I'm interested in Afterland, which I think I didn't mention will also come out towards the end of the month on the 28th of July. So these were my picks for my July TBR, the new releases in July. Thank you very much for watching. I hope you have enjoyed it. I also hope you're still all safe and healthy. I'm looking forward to your comments. Maybe you're interested in any of the books that I've mentioned, and I'll see you all soon in the next one.